Glenn Beck did an interview with Donald Trump. And I have a moment here for you that is so dangerous and so representative of yet another reason why it is imperative that we advocate and push for Trump to not be allowed by the American people to be back in the White House after the 2024 election. And it is the case that Trump is an authoritarian-minded individual and would implement some of these authoritarian ambitions into the way that he governs in a potential second term in the White House. And that must be called out. We'll get into more what I mean by that. But in this clip, you'll hear him use the lies that we've heard about Biden sicking prosecutors on Trump, and this is a left-wing attack and political persecution of Donald Trump, and not just an example of him potentially violating the law and being held accountable for that. And so he'll use the lies that we've gone through a gazillion times, why they are indeed lies, to justify him calling for the thing he's saying the other side's doing to him. So now he's actually saying, he's running on a platform of, I'm going to politically persecute my political enemies, and using to justify in saying that the other side's doing that to him when they're actually not. And you know they're not, because he's incapable of engaging with the specifics of the accusations against him, because there's actually significant evidence to justify these indictments. So it has to be vague. It has to be go after the prosecutor and not actually engage with the indictments. Because if they were just manufactured, fabricated political persecution like indictments, then you would be able to walk through and explain, look at how weak this is. Look at the specifics and the bogus nature of the charge. But that is rarely done. It's more, nebulous, Biden is doing this or something, even though, again, no evidence of that whatsoever. But here's Trump with Glenn Beck.
You said in 2016, lock her up. And then when you became president, you said, we don't do that in America. That's just not the right thing to do. That's what they're doing. Do you regret not locking her up? And if you're president again, will you lock people up?
Well, I'll give you an example. The answer is you have no choice, because they're doing it to us. I always had such great respect for the office of the president, the presidency, but the office of the president. And I never hit Biden as hard as I could have. And then I heard he was trying to indict me, and it was him that was doing it. You know, I don't think he's sharp enough to think about much, but he was there, and he was probably the one giving the order. But he was, hard to believe that he even thinks about that, because he's gone. But then I said, well, they're actually trying to indict me, because every one of these indictments is him, including Bragg. Bragg put his top people. I don't know if you know this. He put his top person into the office of the Manhattan District Attorney. They've been in total coordination with Fannie Willis. The woman that I never met that they accused me of rape, that's being run by a Democrat operative and paid for by the Democrat Party. So many of these things. I have a couple of other lawsuits, all funded against me by the Democrat Party. These are sick people. These are evil people.
And always, in his mind and to his followers, he is the big victim. Whether it be the accusation of him raping a woman and then being found liable for that. Technically, it was sexual abuse, but then the judge, as we talked about, clarified that indeed, in common terminology, they did find him liable for rape. And the party of family values still supports that individual, but he's the real victim in that situation. Or the 4 separate indictments, all him being a big victim. And no, there's not evidence of a big coordination, as we've talked about in the past. But this is the authoritarian threat that people call out. Because, and I want to remind you that there's always a justification that will be trotted out. There's always a reason why it's justified to do the thing that is authoritarian, that is fascistic in any situation you talk about historically. They'll come up with a justification. In this case, it's, well, they're doing it, so now we're going to go and politically persecute people. We're going to run on. Trump is campaigning on. I'm going to lock up Biden and I guess Hillary Clinton too. For what? Is there significant evidence? Law and order? Is there going to be a process that plays out? I don't know. I'm just going to, however I can, whatever that means, in whatever authority I have to affect this, I'm going to try to get Biden and Hillary Clinton locked up. Which, can you imagine if Biden ran on lock Trump up? He never even comments on the active things separate from him that are examples of Trump being caught up in wrongdoing, and then he gets indicted, and Biden will stay out of it. The most he'll say is he looked handsome in his mugshot. But Trump's broadcasting that idea. And they'll say, in principle, it's horrible for you to be excited about your political opponent getting locked up or experiencing legal troubles. In this case, with Trump's indictments, there are people such as myself who are excited to see the accountability. And that will be called wrong because in principle, you should never want your political opponents to experience legal troubles like this. And then 2 seconds later, lock Biden up. So the contradiction is completely goes unnoticed, I guess. But it also is this example of a truly dangerous campaign. And that goes alongside Trump's coup attempt back in 2021 that in part he's being indicted for, that shows us that should be disqualifying to Donald Trump, at least in the eyes of all of the American people, to ever be in the White House again. He blatantly violated our Constitution and tried to, through potentially unlawful means, just keep himself in the White House despite losing through our lawful election process. And that, combined with wanting to lock up his political opponents, combined with all these other examples we talked about as well, is so authoritarian. That is his ambitions, and that needs to be called out. And I will connect this to a story I want to talk about with Jake Tapper on CNN, asking Chris Christie that question: do you think that your party has an authoritarian problem? So take a look at this clip and we'll discuss further.
There was a column in the Philadelphia Inquirer by a progressive journalist named Will Bunch talking about how he thought the news media was doing a disservice to the public by not frankly and candidly describing what he views as an authoritarian streak going on in the Republican Party. You haven't read the column, I assume, so I'm not even going to ask you about it. But you do describe the conduct of Donald Trump trying to overturn the election as reprehensible. You do condemn it. Yep. But so many people in your party, and I'm not just talking about people running for president or on Capitol Hill, but I mean voters, Republican voters, don't seem to have a problem with it. And I'm wondering, do you think that your party has an authoritarian problem, that they really honestly don't have a problem with violently trying to stop a free and fair election from going forward?
No, Jake, I absolutely don't think that we have that problem. I think what we have is a Donald Trump problem. And that right now what's gone on is that people view Donald Trump synonymously with the Republican Party, and that if you oppose Trump, that's somehow favoring Biden.
Yeah, so your party has an authoritarian problem if you're saying Trump is the problem being referred to there. Well, yeah, he controls most of the party. So then your whole party has that problem because of him being such a big force in it. But that piece that was referenced, the Philadelphia Inquirer piece, is titled "Journalism Fails Miserably at Explaining What is Really Happening to America." And it calls out kind of mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, all the biggies, for treating this election like it's a normal one, kind of the horse race politics, and focusing on things that don't properly contextualize the moment for the viewers or readers or listeners of these different media platforms. I think that's exactly right. And that's why, you know, if you're an avid viewer of the show, I come back to this particular subject, the authoritarian threat and the anti-democratic, which is a part of that, views of Donald Trump, and how so many people support his views, what he did, are okay with the outcome of what he did when it comes to the 2020 election, and would have been fine seeing him stay the president of the United States despite losing that election if he had been successful in the fraudulent slate of electors and the Mike Pence rejecting the certification of the election, and statewide officials doing things that would be against their oath of office, and they would have been okay with that working, and Trump just staying president despite our lawful process. And the reason I come back to that so often is because that is the center point of this conversation in this moment in this election. And the media does do a disservice in not properly adding that context or speaking about this in the terms that it should. So let's go through some of this piece. I think it's really interesting. Again, from let's see here, Will Bunch from the Philadelphia Inquirer. It talks about how at the debate, you started to see this reflect beyond just Trump. As the night dragged on, the only issues the crowd seemed jazzed about were brash challenges to scientific truths that it considers elite liberal pieties, like Ramaswamy's false claim that climate change solutions have killed more people than climate change, or authoritarian vows of violence like Ron DeSantis' promise to render any drug dealers at the border, quote, stone cold dead. None of the 8 people on the stage won. Only Trump, his angry mob, and a 21st century brand of American fascism that is the enemy of democracy, the writing on the wall. You can see here the author using that stark language that he calls out the media for not using. Trump's glowering mugshot instantly became the most talked about picture in American history, yet not one pundit was able to explain why tens of millions of everyday voters are so eager to return to the White House this man who attempted a coup on January 6, 2021, or why his poll numbers rise with each indictment. Absolutely. Diving into that in more depth is something we need more of, and it's because of, in some cases, just a complete drowning in misinformation, and in others, a belief that Trump is more important to them than democracy. That the system we have, the republic, the democratic republic that we have, is less important than Trump and him getting power and the left losing or whatever. What we are building toward on November 5th, the article continues, 2024, might have the outward trappings of an election, but is really a show of force. What we call the Republican Party is barely a political party in any sense of the word, but a dangerous antisocial movement that has embraced many of the tenets of fascism, from calls for violence to its dehumanizing of others, from desperate refugees at the border to transgender youth. I will once again reference, in case you don't believe the author here, in that particular line of dehumanizing language, an elected Republican state representative called trans people demons and mutants explicitly. So it is real, it is dangerous and threatening. There is in reality no 2024 primary because this movement embraced its infallible strongman in Trump 8 years ago. These foot soldiers stopped believing in democracy a long time ago, and I'll just flip to the end here for one last bit. We need to hear from more experts on authoritarian movements and fewer pollsters and political strategists. We need journalists who talk a lot less about who's up or down and a lot more about the stakes, including Trump's plans to dismantle the democratic norms that he calls the administrative state, to weaponize the criminal justice system, as he's promising to do in the clip we started this segment with. Let's see, and to surrender the war against climate change. If the 45th president becomes the 47th, we need the media to see 2024 not as a traditional election, but as an effort to mobilize a mass movement that would undo democracy. We need to understand that if the next 15 months remain the worst covered election in U.S. history, it might also be the last. And that can sound, I know, to people hyperbolic, and it is also plenty probable that if Trump won, it wouldn't end like that necessarily. That maybe he is speaking, making more promises than he actually would follow through on. But the threat being what it is necessitates that language so that people understand what's going on here. Someone has broad support within one of the 2 major parties in the United States of America who blatantly again violated the Constitution in his actions and has called for the termination of the Constitution in the name of his lies about the election. No respect for our democratic process, and has this plan we've talked about in the past to go after the deep state, which would really be just trying to do all these different dangerous power centralizing efforts to get more power in his own hands, and would unravel some crucial aspects of the federal government and its ability to function. And then the violent language we hear within this movement, and also the targeting of political opponents as Trump is doing there. All of it has to be called out, and we can't treat this like a normal election. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to be a part of what makes this show possible, plus get access to the full video version of the show hours before all the clips are able to be uploaded to the YouTube channel, plus get the bonus show on the weekends, you can do so by going to lukebeasleyshow.com/membership. That's lukebeasleyshow.com/membership, and there's a link in the description.